Louisiana's most inbred cousins. For generations of marriages, they produce the most deformed children. Deep within Louisiana's isolated swamps, far from modern society's gaze, a family concealed a dark secret for decades, a secret that only came to light in 1978 when local authorities finally stepped onto Boudreaux's property. Even the most seasoned investigators were shocked by what they discovered, a family line that had practiced marriage among close relatives for over a century, creating one of the most distressing tales of genetic decline ever recorded in the United States. Around 1850, the Boudreaux family made their home in the marshy region of Terrebonne Parish. It began when Jean-Baptiste Boudreaux, a Cajun fisherman, constructed a simple cabin on the banks of a remote bayou. For the next 3 generations, the family stayed relatively connected to the small local community. It wasn't until the Great Depression, as economic hardships grew more severe, that the Boudreaux slowly withdrew from social life. In 1935, Maurice Boudreaux, Jean-Baptiste's great-grandson, chose to relocate his family to an even more secluded part of the swamps, declaring the outside world corrupt and that only familial purity could be trusted. This choice initiated a period of intentional isolation that would span decades. Maurice fathered 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, who grew up with virtually no interaction beyond their own kin. Geographic isolation by itself doesn't lead to inbreeding, clarifies Dr. Robert Thibodeau, a University of Louisiana geneticist who later studied the case. It was the mix of this physical seclusion with a twisted family ideology that set the stage for this genetic catastrophe. Recovered property records show Maurice crafted a kind of family creed rooted in warped readings of religious texts and a belief that Boudreaux blood possessed superior traits that must be kept pure. He first promoted relationships between cousins, and later, even between siblings. Ellie Carter, a social worker involved in the investigations, depicts the scene. The property was like a time capsule, no electricity, no radio, no link to the outside world. The younger children, the 3rd generation born into this closed system, showed clear signs of both physical and cognitive disabilities. The initial generation of cousin marriages had children with relatively mild issues. Joseph Boudreaux, Maurice's eldest, wed his first cousin Marie in 1953. Their 6 children included 2 born with extra digits, polydactyly, and 1 with a cleft lip. Yet, all could function fairly well within the isolated family setting. The real genetic breakdown emerged in the following generation, when Joseph and Marie's own children were urged to marry each other. Paul and Annette Boudreaux, themselves cousins, had 4 children between 1971 and 1976. All suffered from severe congenital defects, including microcephaly, major facial deformities, and profound intellectual disabilities. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. The tale of these Louisiana cousins is just one of many unsettling revelations about consanguinity we share here exclusively. Subscribe now so you don't miss the upcoming chapters that uncover even more shocking secrets of these isolated families. The Boudreaux family was found by accident in March of 1978. A local hunter, Thomas LeBlanc, lost his way in the swamps during a storm and sought refuge near the remote property. What he glimpsed from a distance unsettled him profoundly. Children with strange looks, moving awkwardly in the main house's yard. They were like creatures from another world, LeBlanc later told police. Some had heads that were far too small. Others had twisted limbs. The whole sight gave me a feeling I can't describe. When authorities finally entered the property in April 1978, they discovered a cluster of 5 crude houses holding 32 individuals, all linked by a complicated web of kinship. Photos and seized personal records showed that by then, first cousin marriages had occurred for 3 generations straight, and in the most recent generation, even siblings had formed pairs. I'd seen nothing like it in 22 years on the job, recorded Sheriff's investigator Dale Thibodeau. Some of the younger children were barely recognizable as human at first glance. There was a girl about 6 who couldn't walk or speak, just made rough sounds. She was very short for her age, and her face had features that reminded me of something from a nightmare. Dr. Margaret Wilson, the pediatrician who examined the children, prepared detailed accounts of the medical issues found in the 3rd generation of inbred marriages. We noted a worrying concentration of harmful recessive genes. 12 of the 17 children born after 1970 had serious craniofacial or cardiovascular deformities. 4 were born with advanced polydactyly, not just extra fingers, but complex, useless digital structures. One of the most striking cases was Emily Boudreau, born in 1974, the child of Paul and Annette, first cousins who shared the same grandparents. Emily had a rare disorder called cyclopia. She possessed a single central eye where her nose should have been and lacked a nasal septum. Her life expectancy was very short, yet she surprisingly lived to age 4. Jerome Boudreau, the family patriarch at the time of discovery and Maurice's son, fiercely defended their practices when questioned by authorities. What we do is nobody's business. We've always lived our own way, apart from others' rules. Our family is strong precisely because we keep our blood pure. Anthropologist Dr. Claire Fontenot, who extensively studied the case, explains, what we see with the Boudreaux is a phenomenon called the founder effect combined with repeated inbreeding. When a small, isolated group continues to reproduce internally, certain genetic traits, including harmful ones, become more and more concentrated. A limited gene pool, followed by deliberate inbreeding, magnifies problems exponentially. The investigation found the family had created their own simplified language, a dialect stemming from Cajun French but nearly impossible for outsiders to understand. Their religious rituals were similarly unique, a blend of distorted Catholicism, local superstitions, and beliefs invented by Maurice decades earlier. Disturbing homemade medical records, kept by Lorraine Boudreau, who acted as the family healer, showed a grim pattern. Each new generation had more health issues than the last, with increasingly high infant mortality. Authorities faced an unprecedented ethical and legal puzzle. Louisiana law banned sibling marriage, but first cousin unions, while socially frowned upon, weren't technically illegal in the state at that time. Furthermore, many partnerships were never officially recorded, existing only within Boudreau family tradition. District Attorney Martin Guidry chose to prioritize the children's welfare. Our immediate focus must be getting these children proper medical care. Some have never seen a professional. Legal matters about marriages can wait. 17 children under 18 were temporarily taken from the property and placed under intensive medical care. Examinations revealed the alarming scope of their health problems. Beyond visible deformities, many had serious internal conditions, congenital heart disease, kidney malformations, and severe neurological disorders. The case received limited local media attention, but officials worked to limit the release of details and photos, citing concerns for the victim's dignity. However, a Times-Picayune reporter managed a brief interview with Alice Boudreau, one of the few family members able to communicate with outsiders. "We didn't know there was another way," said Alice, then 32, herself the product of a first-cousin marriage and wed to her cousin Raymond. "For as long as I can remember, that's how things were. When you grow up hearing the outside world is dangerous and only family can be trusted, you believe it." The Boudreau case became a landmark in the study of prolonged inbreeding. Dr. Victor Lamar, a forensic geneticist who analyzed samples from the family, later published an anonymous study protecting the subjects' identities that became a medical reference. "What we have here is one of the most dramatic documented examples of harmful recessive gene homozygosity," Lamar wrote. After 4 generations of consanguineous marriage, the inbreeding coefficient reached levels that made rare genetic conditions virtually inevitable. When you consider the unimaginable suffering of these Boudreau children, confined for generations in the Louisiana swamps, what emotion rises in your heart? Leave in the comments. The pain of these children makes me reflect on humanity. Older children, capable of basic communication, shared disturbing details of family life with social workers. Martha Boudreau, then 14, described how they were taught from an early age that marrying outside the family was a betrayal and would contaminate their line. Uncle Jerome always said our blood was special, that we had to keep it pure. If any of us questioned it, he'd show pictures of town people and say they were all sick and weak. The most tragic find was a small, makeshift cemetery on the property. Hidden among cypress trees and partly waterlogged, it held 23 rough graves, most of them infants and young children who hadn't survived due to extreme deformities. Many of these births had never been officially registered. Dr. Patricia Montgomery, a psychologist assigned to evaluate the adult family members, found consistent patterns of impaired cognitive development, even in those without obvious physical deformities. We are seeing the combined effects of extreme social isolation, repeated inbreeding, and a lack of education and culture, she concluded. Ironically, the meticulous records kept by Maurice Boudreau, the original patriarch who began the isolation, became a valuable resource for researchers. His diaries, written between 1935 and 1968, obsessively tracked genealogies, births, and descendants' physical traits, often with disturbing notes on improving the bloodline through specific pairings. The fate of the Boudreaux became a complex challenge for Louisiana's social services. Those with the most severe, multiple impairments were sent to specialized institutions. Those with greater functional ability were placed in foster homes, though their unusual background and behavioral issues stemming from extreme isolation made successful adaptation difficult. These children faced monumental hurdles, recalls Shelley Romero, a social worker on the case. Beyond the physical and cognitive limits from inbreeding, there was cultural shock. Many had never seen a TV, didn't know what a phone was, and had extremely narrow ideas of the world beyond the swamp. The adult family members faced their own struggles. With no job skills, no formal education, and often mild cognitive issues, integrating into conventional society proved nearly impossible. Some remained in nearby rural areas under official supervision to prevent the old family structure from reforming. The case sparked legislative debate in the state. In 1980, partly motivated by the Boudreaux situation, though never explicitly named, Louisiana tightened its laws against incestuous marriage, including harsher penalties and broadening the legal definition of forbidden relationships to explicitly include first cousins. The scientific legacy was also significant. Genetic samples collected with court consent, as many individuals lacked the legal capacity to consent, were used in pioneering research on rare genetic disorders. Chromosomal analysis revealed mutation patterns that helped pinpoint genes linked to various conditions. While the circumstances are profoundly tragic, explains geneticist Eleanor Bro, who studied the samples, the genetic data obtained allowed advances in understanding multiple rare conditions. We identified specific patterns of genetic expression that would be extraordinarily rare in the general population. Among the most studied cases was Daniel Boudreaux, born in 1975, who had a remarkable combination of phenylketonuria, PKU, Meckel syndrome, a rare ciliopathy, and an unusual form of albinism. The mathematical odds of these three recessive conditions appearing together in someone from the general population are infinitesimal. But generations of inbreeding had concentrated multiple harmful genes. A particularly unsettling aspect revealed during the investigation was how deformities gradually became normalized within the family system. In his own records, Jerome Boudreaux had created a classification system for the different types of children born into the family, assigning them roles based on their abilities. Clearly, over the generations, the family developed its own social structure that accommodated and categorized the increasing abnormalities, states anthropologist Dr. André Lechan. Children with certain deformities were designated for specific family tasks, creating a twisted hierarchy based on the type and severity of genetic damage. Photographic evidence recovered from the property, now held in confidential archives, documents the progressive genetic decline across generations. Comparing images from the 1950s to those from the 1970s, experts traced the visible escalation of anomalies as inbreeding intensified. In the first generation of cousin marriages, Dr. Lamar explains, photos show slight facial asymmetries and occasional digital anomalies, extra or fused fingers. In the next generation, we see children with obvious craniofacial disproportion. By the third generation of inbreeding, the photographs show individuals with such severe malformations they defy standard medical classification. A long-term study from 1980 to 1995 tracked the development of the surviving children. The results confirmed that, even with intensive medical care and special education, the genetic damage was largely permanent and progressive. Of the 17 children originally removed, only 9 were still alive in 1995, most with greatly reduced life expectancy. The Boudreaux case is often referenced in academic discussions on ethics, genetics, and social duty. The core question endures: how could a family practice inbreeding for generations, causing visible and increasing human suffering, without outside intervention. This wasn't just a genetic event, but a societal failure, reflects social worker Ellie Carter, who followed the case for decades. The surrounding community was aware, on some level, of this isolated family. There were rumors, stories, but a mix of excessive respect for privacy, local superstitions about swamp folk, and plain indifference let this continue for decades. In 1998, 20 years after the discovery, historian Dr. Michelle Thibodeau interviewed area residents, documenting pre-existing community knowledge of the Boudreaux. The findings were disturbing. Many admitted to hearing tales of that strange swamp family since childhood but dismissed it as local folklore or chose to ignore the rumors. A local store owner who occasionally sold supplies to Jerome Boudreaux confessed, "We knew something was off. Jerome came to town alone, maybe twice a year, buying huge amounts of basics. He was quiet, talked funny." The Boudreaux legacy continues today, though quietly, scattered across Louisiana institutions and foster families. The younger survivors, now adults, bear in body and mind the consequences of their ancestors' choices. Their ongoing medical issues stand as a reminder of the dangers of prolonged inbreeding and extreme isolation. What makes Boudreaux so significant, explains geneticist Dr. Jason Landry, who continued to study the case, is that we can track genetic deterioration precisely across multiple documented human generations. Modern genetic analysis, using technology not available during the initial discovery, shows the founder effect in the Boudreaux family was even greater than first thought. Jean-Baptiste Boudreaux, the original settler in 1850, already carried recessive genes for at least 5 rare disorders. Repeated inbreeding massively amplified these traits, leading to the extraordinary concentration of anomalies seen in children born in the 1970s. In a cruel twist, the original Boudreaux property was absorbed by a nature preserve in 1990. Today, only partially flooded ruins of the original structures remain, slowly being reclaimed by the swamp. The small cemetery was documented but left untouched by official decision. Its simple wooden crosses have long since rotted away. The case led to major changes in social work practices in rural Louisiana. Outreach programs were launched to identify isolated families, and health professionals got specific training to recognize signs of consanguinity and intervene properly. As of 2020, only 3 adult members of the original Boudreaux generation were still living. Alice Boudreaux, one of the few who partially adapted to conventional life, gave an anonymous interview for an academic study. "I don't blame my parents or grandparents. They didn't know what they were doing. They thought they were protecting the family, but the price we paid. No one should endure what our children did." Dr. Robert Thibodeau, who studied the case from the start, concludes, "The Boudreaux history remains one of the most documented examples of prolonged human inbreeding effects. It's a tragedy that should never have happened, and it continues to offer vital lessons for geneticists, social workers, and lawmakers about balancing family autonomy with society's duty to prevent foreseeable harm." If you've watched this far, you enjoy this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here," so I can recognize you and know who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Be sure to like this video and share it with others interested in these revealing tales about society's darkest secrets. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, as we have many other shocking and educational stories about similar cases you won't find anywhere else. The Boudreaux case is more than a scientific curiosity or a cautionary tale. It is a stark reminder of the human genome's fragility under extreme conditions and of our shared responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, even when they are hidden in the swamp's shadows, far from society's view.